Imagine reaching into your pocket for a simple dime, that everyday token of commerce, only to realize it's a hollow shell of what it once was. A silent victim in a high-stakes global chess game that reshaped the very foundation of trust in money. This isn't just about coins, it's about the shadows lurking behind the shiny facade of economic progress, where world leaders played a dangerous game with precious metals and the average American was left holding the bag. What if I told you that the change jingling in your drawer today carries the echoes of a quiet crisis that nearly toppled the dollar's throne? Welcome to the hidden vaults of financial history, where we'll peel back the layers of deception. If you're hooked already, hit that like button to support these deep dives, subscribe for more revelations, and drop in the comments, what's the oldest coin you've got stashed away? Let's uncover the truth together. Our story begins in the bustling heart of mid-1960s America, a time of booming post-war prosperity where drive-ins were popping up, rock and roll ruled the airwaves, and the American dream felt unbreakable. But beneath this glossy surface, subtle cracks were forming in the nation's monetary backbone. Picture the scene. Families heading to the corner store, vending machines humming along highways, jukeboxes blaring hits, all fueled by coins that weren't just currency, but tiny repositories of real value. Back then, your quarter, dime, and half dollar weren't cheap alloys. They were forged from 90% pure silver, a metal as old as civilization itself, gleaming with intrinsic worth far beyond its stamped denomination. It was a system born in an era when money meant something tangible, when you could bite down on a coin and feel the heft of history. These silver pieces had circulated since the early days of the Republic, surviving wars, depressions, and booms, always holding their ground as a hedge against inflation's whisper. But by 1964, the mint's furnaces glowed one last time for the old guard. The final batches of these silver-laden coins rolled out, destined for pockets and cash registers across the land. Then, like a curtain falling on an act, everything changed. The following year, under the stroke of a pen in the Coinage Act, the composition flipped. A copper heart clad in nickel. No silver in sight. The government waved it off as a mere upgrade. Faster production, lower costs, nothing to see here. Yet, as we'll soon discover, this wasn't evolution. It was a desperate pivot in a much larger storm. As the narrative tension builds, we step back to the hidden mechanisms at play, the undercurrents that no textbook bothers to stir. Why tamper with a formula that had worked for generations? The official line painted a picture of everyday headaches, coins vanishing faster than they could be minted, silver's market price spiking like a fever, and an economy galloping ahead on the fumes of the post-war miracle. Vending machines in factories stood idle, their slots starved. Bank tellers doled out quarters like wartime rations. It was framed as pragmatism. Why pour a precious resource into something as mundane as loose change when factories worldwide craved silver for everything from film rolls and cameras to circuits in the space race tech exploding out of Cape Canaveral? But dig deeper, and the plot thickens with intent. For years, the U.S. Treasury had been the unseen puppeteer of silver's fate, hoarding vast stockpiles amassed over decades of global trade imbalances. These weren't just reserves. They were a strategic arsenal, released in calculated bursts to cap prices whenever speculators got too bold. Think of it as a dam holding back a flood. Pour in just enough to keep the waters calm, ensuring that the silver in a dime stayed worth less than 10 cents on the open market. Why the obsession? Because the alternative was chaos. If market prices surged above face value, every coin in circulation became a mini gold rush.
Hoarders would scoop them up, smelters would fire up, and the money supply would literally melt away, leaving the economy starved. This delicate balance had held firm through the Eisenhower years, a quiet policy of suppression that kept the peace. Yet, by the early 60s, the dam was cracking under pressures no one saw coming. Industrial hunger for silver was insatiable, photography booming with Kodachrome dreams, electronics wiring the future, even medicine tapping it for its antibacterial bite. Demand outpaced supply, and the Treasury's vaults, once overflowing with hundreds of millions of ounces, began to echo hollowly. This internal strain was bad enough, but it was the external storm that truly lit the fuse. Enter the Bretton Woods Accord of 1944, the grand post-war pact that crowned the US dollar as the world's reserve currency, backed by gold at a fixed $35 an ounce. It was a promise etched in international law. Any nation could swap their dollars for Fort Knox's glittering hoard.
America, flush with victory dividends, held the lion's share of global gold, over 20,000 tons at its peak. Stability reigned. Transitioning to the intrigue, we find the first tremors in the late 1950s as Europe's war-scarred economies roared back to life. Nations like West Germany and Japan, rebuilt on American aid, started stacking dollars from exports. But trust in paper waned. They wanted the real thing. Leading this charge was France, under the iron-willed gaze of President Charles de Gaulle. A war hero forged in the fires of occupation and liberation, de Gaulle harbored a deep-seated wariness of American dominance. He'd witnessed the Francs' humiliations, the hyperinflation that gnawed at empires. "No more I-O us," he seemed to declare. In 1965, in a move that sent shockwaves through diplomatic channels, de Gaulle ordered the conversion of France's entire dollar surplus, billions worth, into physical gold shipments. French vessels steamed across the Atlantic, returning laden not with promises, but with bullion. This wasn't isolated bravado. It was a signal flare. Italy, Belgium, even allies like the Netherlands followed suit, eyeing their reserves with newfound skepticism. From 1960 to 1965, the U.S. gold fortress lost nearly a quarter of its treasure, over 3,000 tons siphoned away. The dollar's gold anchor dragged, confidence eroded, and whispers of a run on the bank echoed in Washington corridors. President Lyndon Johnson, navigating the quagmire of Vietnam and civil rights, faced a monetary mutiny. Silver, long the dollar's steadfast companion, felt the ripple effects. Historically, their prices danced in a fixed ratio, often 16-1 or 20-1, silver trailing as the reliable understudy. As gold's pressure mounted, silver's market value inched perilously close to eclipsing the coin's nominal worth. A 1963 quarter? Its silver content was trading at 18 cents. By 64, it hovered at par. The math screamed disaster. Circulation would grind to a halt as Americans melted their money for profit. Now, the escalation hits full throttle, revealing the financial implications that rippled far beyond pocket change. The Johnson White House stood at a crossroads in this gilded crisis. Option 1. Shatter the Bretton Woods illusion by hiking gold's official price, easing strain on both metals, but admitting the dollar's vulnerability. It would invite global panic, fuel inflation, and undermine America's post-war supremacy. Option 2. Sacrifice silver on the altar of gold. Strip it from coins to free up supplies, stem hoarding, and buy precious time for the larger system. They picked the path of least resistance, the Coinage Act becoming the sacrificial blade. Johnson addressed the nation via flickering TV screens, his Texas drawl steady. "These new coins will be just as good as the old ones." They circulated, yes, but at what cost? The act didn't just debase denominations, it signaled a shift from intrinsic value to faith-based fiat, eroding the psychological bedrock of currency. The implications cascaded like dominoes. Silver flooded into industry, prices stabilized short-term, but the Treasury's grip loosened forever. Hoarding surged anyway. Vintage coins became collector's prizes, their melt value soaring over time. More critically, the gold drain accelerated. Bretton Woods teetering until Nixon's 1971 shock severed the dollar from gold entirely, ushering in the floating exchange era we navigate today. De Gaulle's gambit exposed the fragility. What happens when trust in the reserve currency frays? The 65 coin switch was a band-aid on a hemorrhaging system, delaying the inevitable while inflation's seeds took root. By the 1970s, oil shocks and deficits turned those seeds into a wildfire. Stagflation ravaged savings. The dollar lost 80% of its purchasing power since. Why does this matter now, in an age of digital wallets and crypto dreams? Because the ghosts of 1965 haunt our headlines. Central banks hoard gold anew amid geopolitical rifts. Russia, China, echoing de Gaulle's defiance, converting dollars to bullion as trade wars brew. Silver's resurgence in solar panels, EVs, and 5G tech mirrors the 60s boom, with prices volatile enough to tempt modern hoarders. And the core lesson? Money's value is a delicate pact between governments and the governed. When leaders like Johnson prioritize short-term fixes over transparency, the bill comes due in eroded wealth and shattered faith. Today's Fed dances with inflation ghosts, quantitative easing echoing Treasury manipulations while digital currencies challenge the old guard. Are we repeating history, debasing without silver's shine? In the end, that worthless dime in your pocket isn't just junk metal. It's a relic of a pivotal betrayal, a reminder that financial systems are built on stories we tell ourselves. From de Gaulle's bold Atlantic crossings to Johnson's resolute facade, the 1960s dismantled illusions one coin at a time. As we hurtle toward uncertain markets, ask yourself, what hidden pressures are bending our money today? Stay vigilant, dig deeper, and remember, the real value lies in understanding the game. Thanks for joining this journey through the vaults. If this sparked your curiosity, like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Until next time, keep questioning the change. Hashtag exclamation point at Meta, quote, pause, quote, colon, quote, sex, quote, colon, 1.5. In the shadows of the 1960s, as America's economy roared like a rocket engine, a quiet revolution was brewing in the nation's pockets.
Imagine reaching for change at a diner counter, only to realize the shiny coins slipping through your fingers weren't what they seemed anymore. This wasn't just about loose change. It was a desperate maneuver to save the entire dollar from collapse, a secret pact between presidents and markets that would ripple through history. But to uncover why silver vanished from our currency, we have to peel back the layers of deception and dive into a tale as old as civilization itself. Let's step into the tense boardrooms and congressional halls of 1965, where President Lyndon Johnson and his advisors stared down a brewing storm. The Coinage Act that year wasn't some dusty law on metal alloys. It was a calculated sacrifice, trading silver for the illusion of stability to shield the golden heart of the U.S. economy. By stripping silver from everyday coins like dimes, quarters, and half dollars, replacing them with cheaper copper-nickel blends, they bought precious time. 6 fragile years before the whole Bretton Woods edifice would crumble under Richard Nixon in 1971. But the real intrigue? It wasn't the metals at stake.
It was the masterful spin that turned potential panic into everyday progress. Picture Johnson, the towering Texan with a voice like gravel and thunder, addressing the nation not from the Oval Office's glare, but through carefully crafted announcements that painted a picture of booming prosperity. No dire warnings of crumbling reserves or international pressures from figures like France's Charles de Gaulle, who was already eyeing America's gold stockpiles with suspicion. Instead, the story spun was one of simple necessity. America's explosive growth, factories humming, families expanding, vending machines popping up on every corner, had outstripped the supply of traditional coins. Modern demands require modern solutions, they declared, framing the shift as an upgrade, a step forward into the jet age.
Both sides of the truth held water. The economy was surging, coins were scarce, but by dodging the monetary alarm bells, they kept the public calm. After all, in the high-stakes game of currency, confession is collapse. Whisper that the money supply is fracturing, and trust evaporates faster than a summer rain. Johnson's team knew this intimately. Perception was the ultimate reserve. Congress bought the narrative hook, line, and sinker. Debates were muted, almost perfunctory, with bipartisan cheers echoing through the chambers. Republicans and Democrats alike nodded along, grasping the unspoken terror of the alternative, a full-blown devaluation that could spark runs on banks and shatter alliances abroad. Yet, lurking in the fine print of that legislation was a clause so telling it bordered on confession. For 5 years, it banned the melting down or exporting of those old silver coins. If this was truly about easing shortages and streamlining production, why the ironclad prohibition? Why criminalize what should have been a seamless transition? The answer, buried like contraband in a vault, was foresight laced with fear. The administration anticipated the human instinct that would unravel their plan. The moment those clunky new clad coins flooded circulation, savvy Americans would sniff out the downgrade and pounce. And pounce they did, in ways both subtle and relentless. At first, it was whispers in kitchen conversations, a grandmother eyeing her grocery change with newfound scrutiny, slipping silver quarters into jars before they vanished forever. Coin enthusiasts, those quiet hunters of history, scoured piggy banks and parking lot finds, pulling pre-1965 treasures from circulation like artifacts from a lost era. The government watched from afar, their predictions unfolding like a scripted thriller. Within months, the hoarding accelerated. By the end of the decade, silver coins had ghosted from the system entirely. No more jingling in cash drawers at the 5 and dime. No more stacking in teller's trays. They'd migrated to private vaults, heirloom collections, even those legendary coffee cans tucked under floorboards in rural backyards. The public, in a silent referendum, had rejected the substitute. They bet on the tangible gleam of real metal over the government's plated promise. A vote cast not with ballots, but with wallets. But to grasp this exodus, we must rewind the clock, far beyond Johnson's era, to the ancient forge where silver first claimed its throne in human exchange. This isn't a footnote in economic textbooks. It's the backbone of money's enduring mystery. Long before the stars and stripes fluttered over Philadelphia, silver was the silent architect of trade. Excavations in the cradle of civilization, Mesoamerican ruins and Mesopotamian tells, reveal ingots of the stuff bartered as proto-currency around 3000 BC, predating alphabets and empires. Fast forward to the sun-baked hills of Lydia in 600 BC, where King Croesus, yes, the origin of rich as Croesus, stamped the world's first true coins from electrum,
a silver-gold alloy that standardized value and sparked global commerce. The Romans refined it further with the denarius, a silver powerhouse that oiled the gears of an empire stretching from Britain to the Euphrates, serving as the ancient equivalent of today's reserve currency for over 4 centuries. When America's founders gathered in sweltering convention halls to craft a new republic in 1787, they didn't reinvent the wheel. They borrowed from this millennia-tested blueprint. The Coinage Act of 1792 birthed the U.S. dollar, not as an abstract fiat dream, but as a bimetallic anchor, tied precisely to gold and silver weights.
That iconic silver dollar? It packed 371.25 grains of pure silver, a deliberate echo of the Spanish milled dollar, the de facto money sloshing through colonial ports from Boston to Buenos Aires. Why silver, time and again, across cultures and continents? It wasn't whimsy. Silver possessed an alchemical perfection for currency, rare enough to hoard value, abundant enough for daily use, tough against wear, easy to split into fractions, resistant to the tarnish of time. Above all, its scarcity was its superpower. You couldn't counterfeit it en masse. Mining, smelting, minting, each step demanded sweat from the earth, a natural brake on rulers' temptations to flood the market with debased notes. This intricate dance held silver's dual role in delicate equilibrium. As legal tender and raw commodity, its coin value mirrored its meltdown worth. A quarter bought you a soda or its silver equivalent in bullion. No arbitrage, no betrayal. Through the forge of history, this parity endured. It weathered the Revolutionary War's makeshift continentals, the Civil War's greenbacks backed by battlefield bluster, the gut-wrenching panic of 1893 when silver crusaders like William Jennings Bryan thundered against the Cross of Gold. It outlasted the Great Depression's bank holidays and the cataclysm of 2 world wars when nations printed promises amid rubble. Silver coins circulated as trusted proxies, their metallic honesty a bulwark against chaos. Yet, every fortress has its siege. The paradox at silver's core, its worth as money inflating its allure as a resource, set the stage for inevitable fracture. When market forces pulled those values apart, the coins became prey. For centuries, harmony reigned, but the post-war boom of the 1950s ignited the spark. Silver transcended its monetary cage, morphing into the lifeblood of innovation. Post-World War II America, rebuilding a shattered globe while launching its own technological leap, devoured the metal like never before. Kodak's darkrooms craved silver halides for film, capturing the baby boom in black and white snapshots. Emerging electronics, radios, televisions, the first clunky computers, relied on silver's unmatched conductivity, wiring the wired world. Hospitals sterilized wounds with silver-infused bandages, while NASA's moonshot programs guzzled tons for rocket components, solar panels, and guidance systems. The space race, that Cold War spectacle, wasn't just about flags on the lunar surface. It was a voracious consumer of silver, driving prices skyward as industrial hunger outpaced mint output. As demand surged, the arbitrage window cracked open. Silver's commodity price climbed above its face value, turning every coin into a hidden windfall. Holders sensed the shift before headlines screamed it. A quarter worth 25 cents at the store, but 30 cents melted down. The 1960s weren't undone by cultural upheavals like Vietnam protests or Woodstock anthems. They were eroded by this invisible force, the relentless pull of technology on tradition. Johnson's Coinage Act was the frantic patch, debasing coins to stem the bleed, but it only accelerated the hoarding frenzy. Silver fled circulation, not for dramatic reasons, but because markets, like water, always find their level. Today, as we navigate cryptocurrencies, digital dollars, and central bank digital experiments, this silver saga whispers a timeless caution. In an age of endless money printing and algorithmic trades, the ghosts of 1965 remind us, trust in currency is fragile, built on narratives as much as metals. When governments tinker with the money in your pocket, the real cost isn't always on the ledger. It's the quiet erosion of faith.
What if the next modernization isn't clad coins, but something even more intangible, pulling value from our grasp before we even notice? The lesson from silver's vanishing act? History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And those rhymes are echoing louder in our volatile markets than ever. As we chase the next boom, perhaps it's time to check our own change, to question what's truly backing the promises we spend every day. Imagine a nation on the brink, its factories humming, its rockets piercing the sky, and beneath it all, a silent crisis brewing in the vaults of power. In the early 1960s, America was devouring silver faster than it could be clawed from the earth. What if I told you this wasn't just a resource crunch? It was a ticking bomb under the dollar itself, one that could shatter trust in the money in your pocket. As President Lyndon Johnson stared down the space race and the escalating demands of a booming economy, the U.S. Treasury was bleeding its precious reserves dry. The question wasn't if the system would break, it was how quietly they could fix it before the world noticed. Let's pull back the curtain on this hidden scramble. By the dawn of the decade, America's appetite for silver had surged into overdrive. From the chemical heart of photographic film to the conductive veins of emerging electronics, from the sterile precision of medical devices to the high-stakes engineering of jet engines and satellites, silver was the unsung hero fueling the technological revolution. But here's the stark reality. Industrial demand was outstripping fresh mine output by a chasm so wide it threatened to swallow the economy whole. Mines in Nevada, Idaho, and beyond were pumping out every ounce they could, yet it wasn't enough. The shortfall? It was being plugged by a wartime relic, the massive government stockpiles amassed during World War II and the Korean conflict when silver was hoarded like a strategic weapon. Picture the Treasury's vaults in 1960, gleaming stacks representing nearly 2 billion ounces of the stuff, a silver fortress built to safeguard the nation's defenses. But by 1965, under the relentless pull of progress, that fortress had crumbled by almost half. The numbers didn't lie, and they were whispering doom. At the current burn rate, factories churning, coin presses stamping, America's silver lifeline would snap within a handful of years. Every circulating dime, quarter, and half dollar minted with real silver became a battlefield prize. Industry wasn't just hungry, it was starving, and the pressure on prices was building like steam in a sealed boiler. Free market signals blared for silver to soar in value, but the government clamped down hard. They doled out stockpiles to keep supply steady and clung to the old coinage laws, artificially pinning prices low to avoid inflation's wildfire. It was a high-wire act. Balance the needs of innovation against the stability of everyday money, all while the world watched. Yet, as the decade unfolded, deeper shadows emerged. Mechanisms buried in bureaucratic memos and late-night strategy sessions. Treasury economists pored over projections like detectives at a crime scene, mapping out coinage needs for the coming years, forecasting the relentless climb of industrial use, and simulating stockpile depletion under every conceivable strain. The verdict was unanimous and chilling. The status quo was a house of cards in a hurricane. To keep the economy aloft, the government would have to overhaul the coin system itself, ditching silver content for cheaper alloys. But this wasn't mere metalwork. It was a psychological minefield. For generations,
Americans had equated the jingle of coins with tangible worth, the cool touch of silver symbolizing the Republic's promise. To strip that away? It risked unraveling the fragile web of faith holding the monetary system together. Delve deeper, and the historical undercurrents reveal why this was no ordinary pivot. The US dollar's gold backing, enshrined in the Bretton Woods Agreement, already tethered the world's currencies to Fort Knox. But silver coins? They were the people's touchstone, a democratic echo of that golden standard. Switching to clad coins, layers of base metals bonded like a counterfeit skin, meant confronting a profound shift. Money as illusion, not substance. If citizens recoiled from debased quarters, they might turn their gaze to paper bills, then to gold certificates, demanding the real thing. That cascade could ignite a run on reserves, echoing the panics of the 1930s, or worse, unraveling the post-war economic miracle. Johnson's administration knew the stakes. In an era of Cold War tensions, with French President Charles de Gaulle already probing American vulnerabilities by converting dollars to gold, any whiff of weakness could embolden adversaries and fracture alliances. As the implications escalated, the Treasury's calculus turned frantic. Models predicted not just exhaustion of silver stocks, but a ripple effect across industries. Without affordable silver, photographic giants like Kodak could stall. Electronics pioneers wiring the future might grind to a halt. Even the Apollo program's moonshot ambitions hung in the balance, their guidance systems reliant on silver's purity. Price suppression wasn't just policy, it was survival. But the coinage bind amplified the peril. Those silver-laden dimes and quarters circulating in pockets and cash registers totaled billions of ounces, a de facto reserve siphoned off by melting pots and manufacturers. Underground markets buzzed with whispers of arbitrageurs hoarding coins for their melt value, undercutting the mint's efforts. The government faced a paradox. Flood the system with new coins to phase out the old, yet avoid the spectacle that could spark public outrage. One wrong move, and confidence in the dollar could evaporate, inviting speculative frenzy or, God forbid, a full-blown currency crisis. Fast forward to the urgency of 1965, when the Coinage Act of that year became the Quiet Revolution's battle cry. This wasn't abstract economics. It was a masterclass in managed deception, cloaked in patriotism. The new coins weren't flimsy fakes. They were engineered for illusion. Cupro-nickel cladding over a copper core gave them heft, a resonant clink, and that silvery sheen Americans craved. Designers obsessed over details. The edge's subtle copper reveal was there, but who inspects change under a magnifying glass? It was theater on a national scale, betting on inertia over insight. Production ramped up to feverish levels, billions of these clad pieces flooding banks, vending machines, and wallets. Yet, the old silver circulated on, a ghost in the machine, as everyday folks unwittingly sorted the wheat from the chaff. Why does this shadow play from the 1960s matter in our hyper-connected, crypto-curious world today? Because it unmasks the enduring fragility of fiat money, the government's solemn vow that paper and metal hold value by decree alone. In an age of meme stocks, digital dollars, and central bank digital currencies, we're reliving that tension. Trust versus tangibility. The silver crisis foreshadowed today's resource crunches. Think rare earths for EVs or semiconductors for AI, where industrial hunger collides with monetary policy. Governments still juggle suppression and stimulus, from quantitative easing to green transitions, all while whispering stability to soothe the markets. And the psychology? It's evergreen. When faith falters, as in the 2008 meltdown or the 2020 pandemic dash for cash, the same fears bubble up. Is my money real? What happens when the promise breaks? As the clad era took hold, the transition unfolded with surprising grace. No breadlines, no barricades. By 1970, silver coins were relics in circulation. By 1975, they were folklore. Americans, ever pragmatic, had self-policed the purge, pocketing the precious and passing the proxies. The government won its wager, executing a monetary sleight of hand that preserved the system's veneer. But the silver didn't dissolve. It migrated, illuminating the alchemy of value in human hands. First, it pooled in the shadows of private sanctuaries. Savvy savers, perhaps with a collector's eye or an investor's instinct, stashed pre-1965 coins in cookie jars, attic trunks, and bank boxes. These weren't for vending snacks or tolls. They were heirlooms, hedges against the intangible tide of paper promises. Families passed them down like whispered lore, a tangible bet on enduring worth. Then, the professionals descended. Coin emporiums and bullion barons who saw opportunity in the flux. They snapped up silver at modest premiums, then fed the furnaces, transforming numismatic art into raw bullion. Quarters became ounces, melting away engravings to feed the very industries that sparked the shortage. It was efficient Darwinism, material value trumping sentimental form, fueling circuits and screens without sentiment. And strangest of all, the silver lingered in limbo, tucked into dresser drawers across suburbia, forgotten amid life's clutter. Millions held on to these coins not for profit or preservation, but from some innate reluctance to let go of the old ways. No manifestos, no strategies, just quiet accumulation. A collective subconscious clinging to substance in a world tilting toward abstraction. In the end, this saga of silver's exodus isn't just financial history. It's a mirror to our appetites and illusions. It reminds us that money's magic lies not in the metal, but in the stories we tell ourselves. As we hurtle toward tomorrow's uncertainties, from supply chain snarls to sovereign debt dances, the lesson endures. Trust is the true currency. And when it frays, even empires must reinvent their shine. What hidden reserves are we burning through today? The clock, as ever, is ticking. Imagine this. Ordinary folks across America, from bustling New York apartments to quiet Midwest farmhouses, quietly transforming their everyday change into hidden treasures. These weren't savvy investors plotting in boardrooms. They were teachers, factory workers, and housewives acting on a gut feeling that rippled through the nation like an underground current. As the 1960s rolled on, under President Lyndon Johnson's watchful eye, the U.S. Mint rolled out those new copper-nickel coins, sleek and shiny, but stripped of their silver soul. At first, it seemed seamless. But beneath the surface, a quiet revolution was brewing. People didn't just spend these imposters. They began to separate the old from the new with an almost primal instinct. Slip a pre-1965 quarter into your pocket, and it felt right. Heavier, more substantial, ringing with a deeper tone when it clinked against others. That dime from your childhood? It carried a cool, metallic promise your fingers could sense. No textbook was needed. The body knew before the mind caught up. This wasn't random. It was the ancient pulse of Gresham's law beating through modern veins. Bad money driving out the good. Not through cold equations on a chalkboard, but through the simple act of human touch. You'd hand over the lightweight nickel quarter for your coffee, but tuck the silver one away, safe in a sock drawer or the back of a cupboard. Why? Because deep down, everyone sensed the shift. The government's promise was thinning out, like silver diluted in the alloy. And as French President Charles de Gaulle eyed America's gold reserves across the Atlantic, questioning the dollar's unshakable throne, that intuition sharpened. Was the world's mightiest currency built on sand?
Word spread, not through headlines or broadcasts, but in whispers at family dinners, nods from corner bankers, and chats with local coin enthusiasts. Your uncle might lean in over Thanksgiving turkey. "Keep the old ones, kid. They're worth more than they look." A teller at the drive-thru would slip you a tip. "That shiny one's just clad. The real deal's the ones with the edge." No central command, no app notifications pinging your pocket. Just organic diffusion, like ink bleeding through paper. By the end of the decade, silver coins had vanished from vending machines and toll booths, ghosts in the machine of daily trade. You could still plunk one down for face value, sure, but who would? In 1970, that quarter's silver sliver was already edging toward 18 cents of real worth, enough to spark hesitation, to hoard just in case. Fast forward to the turbulent 1980s, when the financial world teetered on the edge of chaos. Silver prices didn't climb, they erupted. In January 1980, amid global oil shocks and inflation's fiery grip, the metal skyrocketed to $50 an ounce, a frenzy fueled by tycoons and speculators alike. Suddenly, those forgotten jars in attics weren't loose change. They were fortunes in disguise.
A single pre-1965 quarter? Now fetching around $9 in melt value, 36 times its nominal 25 cents. Dimes ballooned to over $3, half dollars to a staggering $18. Families dusted off heirloom coffee cans, unearthed basement shoeboxes, and queued at coin dealers like prospectors in a gold rush. The air buzzed with excitement. Scales clattered, checks were cut, and tons of silver poured into melting pots. Premiums for rarity? Evaporated in the heat of pure metal hunger. But hold on. Was this windfall a trap? The spike was a mirage, a brief supernova in the silver sky. Within months, prices plummeted, crashing below $10, then stabilizing in the single digits. Sellers who cashed out at the peak cashed in big, their instincts validated. Those who held out, dreaming of endless highs, they watched gains dissolve like mist. And the true quiet winners? The ones who never sold. Their coins evolved beyond bullion, into relics, emblems of a bygone monetary era. Uncirculated proofs, rare mint marks, they commanded prices swollen by nostalgia, far outstripping mere melt value. These weren't just lumps of silver. They were time capsules, whispering tales of when money meant something tangible, unbreakable. Today, in our hyper-digital age, those pre-1965 coins linger in a fascinating limbo. Dealers snag them for $1 to $3 above spot price, condition be damned, while collectors chase pedigrees for even more. You could, in theory, tender a 1964 quarter for your latte, 25 cents toward a $5 cup, but you'd be a fool. Its silver alone tips the scales at several bucks, depending on the day's market whim. Melting it yourself? A legal gray zone, with defacement laws lurking like unseen tripwires, though rarely enforced. So they hover. More than pocket lint, less fluid than a gold bar. A bridge between what money was and what it pretends to be now. Sex 1.5. Peel back the layers, and this saga isn't just about coins. It's a mirror to money's fragile heart. For millennia, currency was concrete. Gold for empires, silver for trade. Metals that served kings and craftsmen alike. Coins embodied wealth, not just signified it. You could forge a blade from a hoard or crown a queen. But 1965's pivot, amid Johnson's Great Society dreams and de Gaulle's defiant gold demands, shattered that bond. Enter fiat, faith-based tokens, where a quarter's copper-nickel shell cloaks a mere 5-cent core. The rest? A collective hallucination, upheld by law, habit, and trust in Uncle Sam's word. It hums along until it doesn't. When faith frays, as it did in the 70s stagflation, or whispers of today's debt mountains, eyes turn elsewhere. Gold vaults fill, silver stashes multiply, even cryptocurrencies flicker as digital defiance. The 1965 experiment? A stealth trial run for fiat's reign. America eased into it, coin by coin, proving people would play along if the swap was sly enough. But the hoarding? That was the caveat, the subconscious vote of no confidence. In a world of inflating promises, those silver survivors remind us, true value slips through fingers that forget to grip tight. Sex 1.5. Imagine reaching into your pocket right now, pulling out a quarter, and realizing it's not just change, it's a silent confession. A confession that the money we carry every day has been stripped bare, its true worth melted away decades ago without a single protest.
What if I told you that the coins jingling in your change purse are worthless relics, costing more to make than they're worth, while the real treasure your grandparents spent vanished into the shadows? This isn't ancient history. It's the hidden fracture line running through America's financial soul, and it's cracking wider today. So let's step back to the turbulent 1960s, a time when the world seemed to be spinning off its axis. President Lyndon Johnson was battling wars abroad and unrest at home, while across the Atlantic, Charles de Gaulle was demanding France's gold reserves from U.S. vaults, shaking the foundations of global trust in the dollar. Amid this chaos, a quieter revolution unfolded in the mints of America. Silver, the shimmering backbone of everyday coins for over a century, was quietly phased out starting in 1965. Quarters, dimes, half-dollars, no longer bearers of precious metal, but clad impostors made of copper and nickel. The government swore it was for the nation's good, to stem the hoarding frenzy sparked by rising silver prices and international pressures. But as those first base metal coins hit circulation, a subtle unease rippled through the populace. Would these shiny facsimiles hold the same weight, literally and figuratively? At first glance, life carried on seamlessly. You could still grab a loaf of bread or fill up your tank without batting an eye. Paper bills and these new coins greased the wheels of commerce just fine, their convenience outweighing any nagging doubts. No one was bartering with bullion at the corner store. That would grind society to a halt. Yet beneath this smooth facade, cracks were forming. Millions of Americans, from factory workers in Detroit to housewives in suburbia, began siphoning off the old silver coins. Not in a mad rush, but in quiet, deliberate acts of self-preservation. They weren't revolutionaries or economists. They were ordinary folks with an instinct for survival, hedging against a system that suddenly felt fragile. Delve deeper, and you uncover the invisible machinery at work, a web of human behavior that sorted value like an unseen hand. Picture this: a silver quarter from 1964, heavy and resonant when dropped on the counter, versus its 1966 successor, lighter, duller in tone. No textbook was needed to sense the difference. It was primal, tactile. This was Gresham's law unfolding not in dusty theories, but in the palm of your hand. Bad money drives out good. People spent the new coins freely, but the silver ones? They migrated to jars on kitchen shelves, envelopes tucked in attics, forgotten amid life's clutter. It wasn't hoarding for its own sake. It was a subconscious vote of no confidence, a way to straddle two worlds:
the convenient fiat flow of daily life, and the enduring solidity of metal. Where did all that vanished silver end up? Follow the trail, and it splits into 3 shadowy paths, each revealing more about our fragile faith in currency. First, the collectors and visionaries, those sharp-eyed individuals who saw the writing on the wall early. They scoured banks, flea markets, even Grandma's cookie jar, amassing pre-1965 coins not for spending, but as a bulwark against uncertainty. Safety deposit boxes swelled with rolls of dimes and quarters, transformed from pocket change into personal vaults of potential wealth. These weren't speculators chasing quick flips. They were guardians of history, betting that true value doesn't evaporate with policy decrees. Then there were the professionals, the coin dealers and bullion traders operating in dimly lit shops from New York to Los Angeles. They snapped up silver at modest premiums, their scales and furnaces ready.
Many coins met their end in the melt pot, reborn as faceless ingots shipped to factories hungry for industrial silver. Electronics, photography, you name it. The numismatic charm vanished, but the raw metal's worth endured, funneled into the engines of progress. It was efficient, almost ruthless, a reminder that in finance, sentiment often yields to supply and demand. But the most intriguing path? The one that defies logic. Oblivion. Millions of silver coins simply lingered. Shoved into desk drawers, lost in coat linings, piled in piggy banks gathering dust. These weren't the acts of savvy investors or dealers. They came from everyday people who felt a shift in the air but couldn't quite name it. A father slipping a quarter into his son's savings jar. A widow leaving a tin of change untouched in the basement. No grand strategy, just an innate pull toward the tangible. This diffuse hoarding, uncoordinated yet widespread, speaks volumes about human nature. In an era of rapid change, Vietnam escalating, civil rights marching, the dollar under siege from de Gaulle's gold repatriation, people clung to what felt real. It was intuition over instruction, a grassroots filter that winnowed silver from circulation without a single government memo. As the 1970s dawned, the stakes climbed higher, turning this quiet sorting into a full-throated financial drama. Inflation roared like a beast unleashed, eroding the dollar's might. Oil shocks, Watergate, the end of the gold standard in 1971, it all amplified the whispers of doubt. By then, silver coins had become ghosts in commerce. You'd be a fool to spend one at face value when its metal alone outshone 25 cents. But the real escalation hit like a thunderclap in the late 1970s as silver prices surged on rumors of scarcity and speculative fever. Whispers turned to shouts, industrial demand colliding with investor panic, all against a backdrop of geopolitical tremors. Then, in January 1980, the bubble burst into mania. Silver rocketed to $50 an ounce, unthinkable heights fueled by the Hunt brothers' infamous cornering scheme. Suddenly, that dusty jar of quarters wasn't chump change. Each one gleamed with about $9 in melt value, 36 times its nominal worth. Dimes, a steal at over $3 apiece. Half dollars ballooned to $18. Families across America unearthed forgotten troves, inherited stashes from aunts, rolls from long-shuttered businesses. Lines snaked around coin shops as people hauled in burlap sacks and shoeboxes, eyes wide with disbelief. Dealers, overwhelmed, weighed heaps of history on creaking scales, scribbling checks that turned attic relics into instant windfalls. The air buzzed with urgency. Melt it now, before the peak slips away. Silver flooded the market,
much of it pulverized into bars, stripped of its coinly identity. Yet as quickly as fortune smiled, it vanished. Within months, silver plummeted, crashes engineered by regulators and market forces settling into a fraction of its glory. Sellers who cashed in at the zenith reaped riches. Those who held out for more watched gains dissolve like mist. But the true survivors? The ones who never sold. The coins left to molder in drawers. They evolved beyond mere metal. Over time, these artifacts accrued premiums, numismatic allure for the uncirculated gems, proof sets, and rarities. They weren't just silver anymore. They were time capsules, etched with the story of a monetary pivot point. Proof sets from the Johnson era, dimes that once bought a candy bar, now commanding collector prices far above melt value. Why does this echo chamber of the past matter in our hyper-digital age? Because it's a stark warning etched in alloy. Trust in money is as much emotion as economics.
Today's coins? Pennies, mostly zinc with a copper veneer, cost the mint over 2 cents each to produce. Nickels, a copper-nickel mashup, bleed red ink annually. Quarters and dimes, clad just like 1965's debutantes, carry metal value pennies shy of face. We churn them out by the billions, not because they hold intrinsic worth, but because ditching small change would spotlight the inflation that's gnawed our currency to the bone. Your pocketful buys less than your grandparents ever did, not just in groceries or gas, but in the stuff of substance. We've normalized a system where value is decreed, not inherent. Yet history shows we rebel in subtle ways. Crypto booms, gold glints in vaults, even meme stocks. Aren't they modern echoes of that silver hoarding? Instincts don't die. They adapt. As the camera pans over a cluttered desk drawer, silver glinting faintly amid the mundane, consider this. Those forgotten coins aren't defeats. They're defiant relics. They remind us that while governments mint and markets fluctuate, the human pulse for real value persists. In an era of endless zeros on screens and debts that dwarf nations, perhaps it's time to weigh what's truly in our hands. What will you hold on to when the next shift comes? The answer might just be staring back from your change. Silver coins cascading across a table, morphing into modern, dull quarters rattling in a pocket. A shadowy figure pockets a 1964 quarter, eyes darting suspiciously. Imagine this. In your wallet right now, a coin that looks like money, spends like money, but is it really money? What if the shiny promise of your pocket change hides a deeper crack in the foundation of everything we buy, save, and trust? Tonight, we're peeling back the veil on America's great monetary sleight of hand, a shift that started in the 1960s and echoes louder today than ever. One decision by an embattled president, pressured by a foreign rival, turned our coins from treasures into tokens. And as inflation gnaws at our dollars, that hidden history might just be the warning we need before the next crisis hits. Stock market graphs spiking and crashing. The shadowy value in your change. Let's start close to home, with the everyday jingle in your pocket. Those pre-1965 silver coins, quarters, dimes, halves, they're not just relics anymore. In today's market, they're ghosts of wealth, trading hands at premiums that whisper of their lost glory. Dealers might snag them for $1 or $3 above their silver melt value, depending on the wear and the mint's secret mark. But collectors? They shell out big for the rare ones, the untouched proofs from a mint long faded. These aren't mere metal discs. They straddle worlds, part currency you could theoretically spend at face value, Try handing a 1964 quarter for a soda and watch the cashier's confusion. Part commodity worth dollars in scrap silver alone. Yet, they're trapped in limbo. Melt them down? Good luck. U.S. law frowns on defacing currency, even if enforcement feels like a forgotten footnote. You can't turn your heirloom into bullion without risking a federal knock. So they sit, valuable yet vexed, more prized than paper, but less fluid than a silver eagle. This odd existence isn't accidental. It's the scar of a deliberate pivot, one that redefined what money means. For millennia, coins weren't promises, they were the prize itself. Silver, gold, even humble copper, these weren't just mediums of exchange. They were utility incarnate. Jewelry one day, industrial staple the next. A Roman denarius could buy bread or become a bracelet. Value wasn't decreed, it was embedded. But in the 20th century, America began unraveling that thread, testing if faith alone could hold an economy together. Archival footage of 1960s America. Families at diners, gas pumps ticking, then shadowy boardrooms with tense executives. Music fades to a low, investigative hum. The brewing storm of the silver squeeze. Flashback to the early 1960s, a time when the U.S. dollar ruled supreme, backed by Fort Knox's golden glow. But cracks were forming. Hoarders, sensing silver's ascent, were vacuuming up coins faster than the mint could strike them. Vending machines starved, jukeboxes silenced, laundromats ground to a halt. The everyday economy was choking on its own currency. Enter the hidden pressures abroad. Across the Atlantic, French President Charles de Gaulle eyed America's dollar dominance with Gallic skepticism. He wasn't buying the post-war myth anymore. France, rebuilding from war's ashes, had amassed dollars through U.S. aid and trade. But de Gaulle demanded real backing, not paper promises, but gold. In 1965 alone, his government shipped back billions in dollars to the Federal Reserve, claiming Fort Knox's bullion at $35 an ounce. It was a gauntlet thrown. Redeem your Iowas or expose the bluff. At home, President Lyndon B. Johnson faced a perfect storm.
The Vietnam War drained treasuries. Great Society programs swelled spending. And now, this French firepower threatened the dollar's throne. Silver prices climbed, mint output lagged, and public panic brewed. Johnson, ever the Texan dealmaker, huddled with advisors in the White House shadows. The solution? Demonetize silver in everyday coins. No more 90% silver quarters jingling in jeans. Replace them with copper nickel-clad sandwiches. Cheaper, endless, and unhoardable. Announced on July 23, 1965, amid the summer's swelter, the Coinage Act was Johnson's quiet revolution. It wasn't broadcast as a betrayal of tradition. It was framed as progress, freeing silver for industry while keeping change flowing. But behind closed doors, the tension crackled. De Gaulle's gold grabs accelerated the urgency. By 1967, France had yanked back much of its reserves, fueling global doubts. Johnson's team raced to dilute the dollar's metallic soul, betting Americans wouldn't notice the swap. Quick cuts of melting furnaces, coin presses hammering, then chaotic stock exchange floors. Heart-pounding percussion underscores rising stakes. The ripple that became a tsunami. The implications? They didn't just echo, they roared. This wasn't a mere metal swap, it was the gateway to full fiat freedom. Post-1965, silver vanished from circulation, and with it, the intrinsic anchor. Coins became symbols, fiat from the Latin for
Let it be done. Government decree made manifest. A modern quarter? Clad copper nickel over a copper core, its metal worth pennies. The dime, the nickel, even the penny, zinc-plated in copper, cost more to make than their face value commands. The U.S. Mint bleeds red on pennies and nickels annually, yet we persist, churning out billions as if denying the erosion.
Why? Admit defeat? Scrapping small change would spotlight inflation's theft, the silent tax that's shrunk a dollar's bite by over 85% since 1965. Your grandparents' quarter bought a candy bar. Yours barely covers the wrapper. But the real escalation lies in trust's fragility. The 1965 shift worked because it was stealthy. Gradual debasement, no fanfare. People kept spending copper-nickel tokens because alternatives sucked. You couldn't fuel your Ford with gold bars or barter groceries with bullion. Fiat's convenience won, but not without whispers of doubt. Millions hoarded those last silver coins, stashing them in jars, attics, safety deposit boxes. It was a hedge against the promise breaking. De Gaulle's defiance proved it. When faith falters, nations and people seek solidity. Fast forward, and those doubts amplify. The 1971 Nixon shock severed gold's last link, unleashing pure fiat. Silver prices exploded in 1980 to $50 an ounce amid inflation's fury. Today, as central banks print trillions, crypto surges, and wars disrupt supply chains, that 1960s experiment feels like prophecy. Bitcoin's rise? A digital echo of silver hoarding. Gold's rally? De Gaulle's ghost demanding redemption. Sex, smartphone apps trading crypto, families checking inflation apps, overlay of crumbling dollar bills. Tension builds with urgent narration. Why this ghost haunts us now? So, why does a coinage tweak from 6 decades ago matter in 2023? Because it's the blueprint for our monetary house of cards. Inflation's at 40-year highs, supply chains snap like twigs, and trust in institutions wanes. Remember 2020? Toilet paper vanished, not from scarcity, but panic. Scale that to money, and you get hyperinflation's nightmare. Venezuela, Zimbabwe, Weimar's wheelbarrows. The 1965 transition showed we could swallow fiat pills, but only if the illusion holds. Johnson's gamble succeeded short-term, blunting de Gaulle's assault and stabilizing coin flow. France's gold repatriation slowed, but the damage lingered. Bretton Woods crumbled by 71. Today, as China and Russia hoard gold and sidestep dollars, we're reliving that pressure. Your pocket change? It's the canary in the coal mine. Pennies cost 3 cents to make. Nickels, 11. We're subsidizing a fiction because ditching it admits the emperor's nude. And the premiums on those old silvers? They're not nostalgia. They're insurance. In a world of endless QE and ballooning debt, people crave the real. Silver coins remind us, money's only as good as the metal or the trust behind it. Lose that, and the jingle in your pocket turns to dust. Slow fade to contemplative shots. A single 1964 quarter spinning on a table, slowing to a stop. Inspirational, yet cautionary music swells. The story of America's silver coins isn't just history. It's a mirror to our future. From Johnson's desperate decree, spurred by de Gaulle's unyielding demand, we traded tangible worth for convenient faith. It powered decades of growth, but at what cost? As we stare down debt mountains and digital disruptions,
one question lingers. How long until the promise cracks? Hoard wisely, spend thoughtfully, and remember, the real value was always in knowing when to hold on. If this peek behind the curtain shook you, hit subscribe for more untold tales of money's hidden wars. What fiat fiction will we unravel next? Sources cited: U.S. Mint reports, historical archives. Call to action overlay. Like if you're rethinking your change. Total runtime est: 20 minutes with visuals and pauses.